All right, today we are going to talk about the 3 most important factors in your financial freedom plan. So the question is, where do you want to go and how do you want to get there? That is your financial freedom plan, and we're going to talk all about that next. All right, I'm here to tell you a couple of things. One, most people have it all wrong. Not most people, the majority of the country. You can see that by savings rates and retirement rates and everything else. A lot of pundits, a lot of gurus, a lot of that type of stuff are all excited about saying, oh yeah, quit your job and do all this stuff and you're gonna be really rich. The fact of the matter is that most people that follow that path don't end up very rich and end up in a worse situation than where they started. And the reason for that is because it takes some time to start making some money with those. So my recommendation has never been, hey, quit your job. My recommendation is do something you love doing, number one. And number two, you have 2 jobs. You have your day job that's gonna put food on the table for your family, roof over the head. And then you have your investing job, which is for your future self in what you're going to do. If you've read The Richest Man in Babylon, one of my favorites, the first thing is you need to pay yourself first, or part of what you've made needs to be your own. And so it's taking away some of that so that you can start building in this second job. But if you want to put this together even faster, we're going to show you a few ways to do that as well. So when I look at a financial freedom plan, what I look at is how fast can I have enough cash flow that everything else is optional. Do I want to get out of bed? Do I want to do this for work? Do I want to do this for passion? Do I want to keep doing this? Where I have options, right? It's all about options. What do I want to do? It's not that I have to do this or I have to do that. It's really about options. So the most important things when we're talking about this financial freedom plan, number one, this is the one people can't even start with typically, or if they do, they start with some crazy number that doesn't even make sense. Number one is know your number. Know your number, okay? Sounds simple? Let's break this down just a little bit because it's a little bit complicated, a little bit more than what you may be thinking here. So when I talk about number one, know your number, I did that opposite. Number one, know your number, okay? The number is how much money you want monthly that comes in passively, okay? Comes in passively. We used to call it mailbox money, okay? This was the money that was just always coming. Now we call it ACH money, where it's just hitting, that type of stuff. Money that's just coming in. Okay, passive income. You don't have to get out of bed for this money to actually come in. There's going to be a few little things, but it's primarily a passive investment where that money just keeps coming in. Okay, so what usually happens when I talk to somebody about knowing their numbers is they're like, oh yeah, I want some crazy amount. I want $50,000 a month, or I want to make $1 million a year. So what is that? That's $79,000 a month. Guys, are these things possible? Yes. Have people done them? Yes. But what you have to realize is that for every single one of these things, there is an opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is, what is it going to cost you to get to these types of things versus other things you could be doing? So I don't recommend just coming out with some pie in the sky number because there is a trade-off. The idea is the higher your monthly number is, the harder it's going to be to obtain, the more work you're going to have to do, the longer you're going to have to do that in order to have that money. And what I typically find is people resorting to get rich quick or lottery mentality where they're like, oh, I really want to have this big number, and so I'm going to take risks that I don't think are that big of risks, and then lots of times people lose all their money with that. So it typically gets somebody into this lottery mentality, which is scary and then turns out to be even a bigger disaster in lots of cases. So we're talking about fundamentals here, guys. We're not talking about these crazy investments or anything else like that. So we've got to know our number. Now, you're gonna say, well, how do I know my number? Well, if you're married, if you have a spouse, if you have a significant other, it probably involves the two of you having a conversation. And I know most people don't like having conversations about money And it's really because they're not on the same page. They don't have enough. They don't know how they're spending. They do not have a mutual understanding of where that money needs to go. So my recommendation is that you have some communication. What I like to do is I like to look at two things. I like to look at an apocalyptic spend. So this is, you lose your job, everything goes wrong, you're basically saying, what's the least amount we can survive? Okay, least amount we can survive. I'm not talking about doing all these crazy things and going on trips and all that type of stuff. I'm saying, what is the least amount of money that we need to survive? Put food on the table. Maybe we have to get a different apartment. Maybe we have to buy a different house. Maybe we have to sell a car. Maybe we have to do all that type of stuff. That's taking all those things and saying, what's the least amount, if we made all these moves, what's the least amount we would need to get by? Apocalyptic budget. I like starting here because it really breaks things down to the basics and makes you rethink about things. So what's the least amount that you need? Start thinking about it. What's your housing going to be like? What's your utilities going to be like? What do you need for food? What do you need for kids? What do you need for, what's the least amount we could get by on? This is a process. You're not going to get it done in one night. It may take quite a while, actually, to kind of figure this out. And it might be a little contentious, which it doesn't need to be. It's basically saying, hey, there's no judgment here, judgment-free zone. All we're saying is, if it was zombie apocalypse, how much money would we need to be able to get by? Okay, to get by, not to thrive, but to get by. We may have to do some things, change some things, but what do we need? So that's the first thing that I like to do. The next thing that I like to do is then look at what would we like to have. Okay, so this is the least amount to get by, zombie apocalypse, and this is what we would like to have, which basically says, hey, this is what we would like to have, okay? The like to have has, some nice trips and, that type of stuff. The like to have is typically more than what you may be spending now. And then there's one in the middle here if you want to do it, and this is your standard of living. So basically what I'm saying is, hey, start with the least amount and then dream and say, what would we like 20 years from now? What does this look like? And then come back to reality and say, what are we really spending now? And what does that look like? Okay. Lots of times in doing this, you're going to have to find some money that comes off here. Most people recommend 20%. I don't even care if you start with 1% and then work your way up. 10% is great too, but like I teach my kids 20%. Take 20% of the income that we're making, and we are going to pay that to ourselves so that we can design this dream lifestyle that we actually want, and we're going to live off the 80%. Okay, so apocalyptic budget, dream budget, the like to have budget. Where we're at now, how is one thing. Then we say, how can we trim some stuff so that we can then use that money? One of the things that I think happens quite frequently in these conversations with spouses, significant others, is they never have the dream conversation, right? So if you have the least amount, it kind of puts things in perspective. And I can tell you, if you do your zombie budget, you're not gonna get it right the first time. You're gonna say, what else can we cut? What else would we need? Do we really need this? Do we really need Netflix? Do we really need this? Whatever it is, like what is the least amount we could get by on? And one of the great things about doing this is it actually brings peace. Because if something is going to happen, you're already on the same page. You already know what that looks like. And you're like, okay, it's zombie apocalypse. We have a plan. We know what it looks like. We're emotionally ready for that plan. We know we've got to do X, Y, and Z. And here we go. We're going to go do that. So having these pre-made decisions makes stress go down if you end up in a situation like that. So we do that. Then we want to dream. What do we really want? Like, let's fast forward 20 years, 30 years, 10 years, 5 years, 50 years, whatever the case is. What do we really want that to look like? Now, I will warn you on this. When you're talking about dreaming like this, it typically can get out of control really fast. Like, oh, we want an airplane and we want this big boat and we want this and we want this and we want this. Well, most of you probably don't realize to have some type of a Learjet just to pay for maintenance and fuel and a pilot, you're talking like $1 million a year, okay? This is not insignificant. So have this within reality, right? Like, what makes sense for you? What do you want? It's basically saying, if I could fast forward my life 20 or 30 years from now, what would I want my life to look like? And it's not about the money, it's about what the money can do for you. So like, what do I want my life to look like? What does that look like? What do my relationships look like? What does my family look like? What are the things I like to do? What are the hobbies? What does my life look like? And what is that going to cost me to live that type of lifestyle? And then with that, then you're going to revise and kind of come to something that you say, hey, you know what, I think this is something reasonable, right? I think this is something that I can have the light to have, and it's reasonable. It's still a dream, but it's not irresponsible, or, you know, I'm going to own a private island type of a dream, which is where a lot of people go to with this. So you start working your way back a little bit. Then we start with our standard of living. What are we spending right now? What are we spending right now, and where are we spending that money? Here's the thing. My good buddy Andy says all the time, I don't care how much you spend, I care that you know how much you spend, number one. And number two, I care that you spend less than what you make, right? Like, there's no judgment. For one person, a budget could be, the B word, people don't like talking about that, but for one person, it could be 3 times, 4 times, 5 times what it is for somebody else. That's not what it's about here. It's about, where are my money, where are my dollars going, and is it going where I want it to go? Because if you don't draft by design, you get it by default, and that usually doesn't get you where you want to go. So let's design the life that we want. Let's design a worst case scenario. Let's design where we're at right now. And with that, we're gonna make a determination of how much of that money are we going to be setting aside to help build our dream lifestyle that we are working towards. And so that usually gets into some conversations of like, well, I think you're spending too much on this, I think you're spending too much on that, and blah, 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 blah. That usually gets into a bad situation between a husband, wife, spouse, partner, whatever the case is. I don't recommend starting there, right? I recommend saying, what's the worst case scenario? What would we like to have? And where are we at now? And how could we make some modifications so we can get some of this money? And the thing is, it's always about a choice, right? Would I rather have this, or would I rather have that? That's really what it comes down to. It's like, hey, find out what's important to you, what's important to your spouse, and then make plans to make those a priority. So you can do the important things. You may not be able to do everything. I'll give you an example. I'm not really into cars, okay? Some people are really into cars. They like fancy cars or nice cars or clean cars or whatever. And I'm not talking like Lamborghinis or something. I'm talking like, a super nice Tesla or something like that. Like, I'm not really into those things. So I drive, my truck's 10 years old, maybe longer, hoping to get another 5 or 10 out of it. I drive an older truck. It's 10 years old. I like it. It does what I want. It's not a big deal for me, right? That doesn't do anything for me. However, I like having a nicer house. So rather than spending money on transportation, and my wife's on the same page with that, which she's like, hey, we don't need, cars are just utilitarian. But we actually like having a place that we can entertain and do those types of things. So we say, well, let's put more focus on our housing arrangements than we do in our transportation arrangements. Now, you may be completely different. You may be like, you know what, having a nice car is what does it for me, and where I'm living and that type of stuff is not as important. So I'm gonna scale down in where my housing expenses and those things are, because I wanna have a nicer car and those types of things. There's nothing wrong with that, right? It's a trade-off. Now, if you're trying to do everything, have the nice car, the nice boat, the nice house, the nice this, the nice that, you're probably gonna go broke before you get there. One of the things you may not realize for some of the research that's actually been done from the Millionaire Next Door is most people that are millionaires don't have these fancy, expensive things. And as a matter of fact, most of your attorneys, your lawyers, your doctors are living paycheck to paycheck. They're just really high income producing, but they're spending really high, which means they're never getting ahead, okay? So that happens quite frequently, so you've got to be careful about that. So we've had these conversations, and with time, we have came up with a number. This is the number that's going to get us the spending that we actually like to have, okay? So let's talk about the like to have budget, and let's just use let's just use some numbers here. I want them to not seem crazy, but I want them to maybe be believable. So let's just say you wanted to be at, let's get my handy dandy calculator here. Let's just say 80,000 a year is where you want to be. So that's 66. Well, let's call it 7,000 a month times 12 is 84,000. Okay, so what we've basically decided is that lifestyle that we want, not what somebody else wants, not what the media wants, not what people are pushing me for. The lifestyle I want, that I can do X, Y, and Z. My spouse can do X, Y, and Z. We're happy about this. We take a trip once a year, whatever the case is. Let's just say that number is 7,000. Now it may be 3,000 or it may be 20,000. That's really up to you. Just knowing the higher it is, typically the more you're gonna have to work, the harder it's gonna take, and the longer time you're gonna have to put in to doing that, okay? But we're just gonna use $7,000 a month, just as a nice round number, which is $84,000 per year. Okay, that's the first thing. So now we know our number, which is $7,000 passive cash flow coming in each month. A couple of things in determining what your monthly number is. I think it's important to realize there's some taxes that can come into play. Typically, when you're higher income earning years, regardless of how much you're making, you're paying more in taxes. And in your less income producing years, you're paying less in taxes. So when you're kind of determining this number, you've got to relook at what tax responsibility is going to look like at these reduced numbers, or where that is, because it may go down substantially. So that's something you really need to take a look at. The other thing you can keep in mind is Social Security. You may be receiving Social Security at some point in this plan. Maybe it's 10 years or 20 years away, or maybe it's next year. So you can add that into that monthly cash flow and say, hey, you know what? Social Security is going to provide this much. This is my deficit from the lifestyle budget that we want. This is what it looks like. And then we start building from there. So that's really interesting. The other thing you have to look at is, do we want to dip into principal? So the concept here is, let's say this is age. Let's say you start at, 60, and this is age 100, right? And this would be 60, and this would be 100, and this would be the amount of money you have. So let's say this is 500,000, and this is 0, okay? What's gonna happen is, if you have to make a return, you're gonna keep that 500,000 until you're 100 years old. Well, what good does that $100,000 do for you when you're 100 years, or what good does the $500,000 do for you when 100 years old, other than buy you a casket? Well, maybe you want your family to get money, maybe you want those types of things. I don't know, maybe you want to donate to charity. Those are all things that you can actually look at. But what most people are looking at doing is saying, hey, I am going to erode some of my principal over time. So at a certain point, I'm only left with, maybe that's $50,000 down here. So I have to make less from this passive because I'm going to dip into my principal. That's something that a lot of people do. The only caution I have on this is people are living longer. So I would add a few more years or 10 more years over estimates, because what's happening with most of these plans is people are outliving them. Medical advancements are getting better. And so you've got to be careful, because if you're planning on living off principal of your investment, you've got to make sure that the duration is long enough that you're not going to get yourself into trouble. There's pros and cons to this, right? I like this concept in basically saying, hey, you know what? I don't want to spend more time working, earning, or developing passive income than what I really need to. I want to just say, hey, this is what I need. This is reasonable. I'm going to use part of my principal from age 60 on, and I'm going to use some of the passive income I have coming in, and I'm not going to have to spend as much money. I'm not going to have to save as much now. That's an option. Other people may say, you know what, I don't want to touch the principal at all because I want to give this to a charity, my kids, or whatever the case is. For simplifying the math right now, I'm just going to do this as if you are not going to be dipping into principal. And the reason is just simply for calculations and to make it easier for you. Because as we start dipping into principal with how long you're there and what are you dipping into, it just adds some other variables. So I'm not saying this is the best way to go. I'm saying this is what I'm doing to make the math simple so that we can stay on the same page. But I want to make sure that you realize there's this concept of, do I want to dip into my principal over time? Which, by the way, that principal may be pre-tax or maybe post-tax. So let's talk about this real quick. You can do some investing where you actually pay the taxes and then the money grows tax-free and you would take it out tax-free. There's something called a Roth. So there's some ideas around that. The second thing is you would put the money in and not pay any taxes on it now, but when you take it out, then you would pay taxes then, with the idea maybe the taxes will be lower than they are now. So those are some things for consideration as you're putting this plan together. All right, you've got your number. You've made the decision if you want to dip into principal or not, or this is going to take some time. Maybe you're still thinking about it. So we're going to run some scenarios. So for today, we're going to say your number is $7,000 or $84,000 a year. I really want a monthly number. Most people don't live off their annual income. They spend it monthly, right? So how much am I going to be spending? Well, I'm going to spend $7,000 a month. Okay, perfect. So there's a couple of things we actually have to solve for, okay? The first one is, how much money do I have now? How much money do I have set aside to help make this lifestyle the dream, what I want to have happen? How much is that? Well, for some of you, that may only be $100, and for some of you, that may be $200,000, right? Again, I don't care what this number is. I care that you know what it is. So I'm going to say that this fictitious person we're talking about, I'm going to say they have $5,000. Maybe it's 10, maybe it's 50,000. We're just going to say $5,000, okay? So how much money do you have now? Okay. Now, the next variable that you need is how much do you want monthly, which we now know is our $7,000 because we went through the other exercises. Then what we talk about next is the interest rate that we're going to get on our money. What rate are we planning on here? Okay, so you can talk about maybe putting money in a CD. You can talk about maybe putting money in the stock market. You could talk about putting money into real estate and buying real estate. You could talk about doing hard money lending and seeing that in some double-digit returns. So those are all things to actually consider. What I really like is hard money lending. So let's say that you could get a rate of 12%. Okay, let's just say you get a 12% rate. Hard money lending, you're getting a 12% rate of return on an annualized basis, and we're going to compound that. So the question is, how much money do I need to get a 12% return in order to take care of my $7,000 a month that I want? And that's going to do number of years. Okay, that's going to determine the number of years. So and then how much money am I going to put in monthly? Remember how we talked about saving 20% and putting that in? How much money am I going to put in monthly? I'm going to say we're going to put in, well, let's just say you're going to put in $1,000 a month, okay? Because we trimmed away, or let's actually say it's 20% of your 84,000 is going to be like 16,000 divided by 12. That's like $1,400. If you were currently making 84,000, somewhere around $1,400 is what I would be working towards, but start somewhere and start working towards that and improving. So let's just say you're going to put in $1,000 a month, and then we're going to solve for the number of years that we need. Okay, so basically the first thing that we're looking at is, okay, how much money do we actually need if we're getting a 12% rate of return? Because we're saying we're not going to dip into principal. So what we're going to be doing is living off that 12%. So if I have $500,000 and I'm getting a 12% return, that's about $60,000. So I would need a little bit more than that. So let's say it's $700,000 at 12% is going to give me $84,000, exactly what we want, okay? So $600,000 is the amount of money that we want to have in order for us to get the full $7,000 at the 12% interest rate without ever dipping into principal. Now, if you're going to dip into principal, this number is going to be significantly less, probably half what that number is what you're going to be looking at. But for simplicity's sake, we're going to say we're not dipping into that. So we're saying, okay, we need $600,000 at a 12% rate. So then the question is, how long is it going to take us in order to get that amount of money? So what we're going to do is we are going to use a simple compound interest calculator. What we're basically saying is you've got $5,000. you're going to be putting in $1,000 a month. And we're going to put that at a rate of 12 months, okay? So for you to get to $600,000, we are going to be at, let's just say we call that, I'm just going to start doing some math, 200. Let's calculate that, and that's too much. This is number of months. So that's going to be 15. So let's just call it 16 years. 16 times 12 is 192. I'm going to change this to 192. And we'll calculate that out. That's going to give you $615,000. Okay. That's what's going to give you 16 years, putting $1,000 in a month, starting with $5,000. This is going to give you $615,000, which is going to pay you $7,000 a month at the 12% interest rate without ever touching principal. So if you're willing to touch your principal, which I think you should strongly consider, this number is going to go down drastically. But for calculation simplicity, I just want to keep it at this. Okay, so now this is a 16-year plan. You put $1,000 in a month. You started with $5,000. You're getting a 12% rate of return because we're doing some hard money lending. And remember, sometimes the money's getting used, sometimes it's not. And you're going to say, well, how do I do all this stuff? I want to teach the principle first, how to do it, the application we can talk about later. I can show you how to do that. So that's where we're at with this as to how much money we have. Now, the next thing you're going to say, well, Ryan, one of two problems here. Either one, I don't have $1,000 a month to put into this, is going to be one of the things that you're going to say. And so how do I get to this amount if I don't have that type of money to put in? Well, one, I would encourage you to put something in that you're taking from your normal income and putting that towards this dream lifestyle that you want to have. But let's say you didn't have anything. Well, what we've got to do is figure out some accelerators, okay? So one of the first accelerators that I like to talk about is it's land, fix and flip, okay? The cool thing about land, fix and flip is you're identifying a piece of property and you are reselling that property. What a lot of people don't realize is that land is actually not very liquid. You can't go get a loan against land. You can go get a construction loan and use the land as collateral, but I can't just go down to the bank and say, hey, this land's worth $100,000, give me $80,000 and let's go do it, because they don't like to lend on that unless there's a construction loan in place and those types of things. So what we're doing is going to people that have an illiquid asset, meaning they have a piece of land and something's happening in their life where they might need money faster. So let's say they're going through a divorce. Let's say there's been a death in the family. Let's say somebody has gotten sick. Let's say that there's a need for other things. Let's say they're moving, whatever the case is. And there's lots of these, and our software actually can help you identify those and know what those are, so we can target those people in certain areas. You got to know which areas to go into and all that type of fun stuff. But land, fix, and flip is basically saying, hey, your property is probably worth $50,000, but it's going to take a year for me to sell it, 6 months to a year. And I'm going to take on all the risk. And if the market changes, goes ups, goes downs, whatever the case is, I'm on the hook for that. So if it's $50,000, I'm willing to give it $25,000. Now, that's not the exact conversation you'd have with them, but it gives you an idea of why they would do that. Now, why would they do that? Because they can't get money any other way unless they want to put it on the market, and then they want to sell it and take 6 to 12 months to do that. The other thing with this land flip that's really nice is you don't have to do any remodeling or any repairs. You're basically buying it, making sure you can sell it for more, putting it back on the market, giving them their cash, and then you're waiting the time so that you can get some profit based upon taking on that risk. So on average, some of those deals you could make between $10,000 and $30,000. So let's just say it's for number 6, so we said 1,000. Let's say you did one land flip deal a year and you made $12,000 a year. I'm only talking about doing one every year. That would provide you with the $1,000 to then make that plan happen. So if you had no additional money, couldn't put anything else into it, which I would encourage you to find a way to do that, but you did one land flip a year, All you have to do is find that property. You're going to have to then get that property resold and follow a format in making those things happen. Now, there's going to be some costs. There's going to be agent fees and that type of stuff, but I'm talking net of, say, $12,000. Now, it could be more, could be less, but this gives you an idea if you did one of those a year. So that means in 16 years, you would do 16 land deals, which would then pay for that. Well, let's do something else that's kind of cool. Let's say you did one land flip a year that gave you $1,000. But let's say that you also had $1,000 you could put in. So now you're putting in $2,000. So you're doing one fix and flip a year, but instead of not having any money, you actually have the $1,000 and you'll get another $1,000 from the land deal. So you're putting $2,000 in every single month. Well, what does that do to our calculations here? Well, 2,000, calculate that up. So if we did this for the same 16 years at our 12% rate, you would be at $1.2 million. Woo! Okay, so then it's like, wow, well, maybe I do want to have $1 million and I'm gonna do this to make it happen. Or maybe you say, you know what? I don't need that much because at 1.2 million, if I can get a 12% return on 1.2 million, let's see where we at with that. 1.2 times 12%, that's $144,000 a year divided by 12. It's $12,000 a month. So maybe like, hey, I don't need $12,000 a month. I only need $7,000 a month. Okay, so what we do is we cut down on the number of years. So we make your plan actually happen faster, where we say, okay, let's go down to, let's say 135. 135 divided by 12 is 11. So we're gonna call it 12 years, okay? So we're gonna say this is 12 years instead of the 16 years. So I cut 4 years off. So I'm going to put that at 144 months, calculate that up. I'm going to have $665,000, which at the 12% return times 0.12 equals $80,000 a year. It should be 84. We're just a hair off on this. Let me just make sure. 665 times 0.12. Yeah, so we're just a hair off. That puts us at 80. For number's sake, I'm just going to leave that. That's 6,650. So we're not quite at the 7. We make an adjustment. I was just trying to get some round years of number of years, so we just put it to 12. Okay, so then you could do that, and you could cut down 4 years. So you've got this option of saying, I need the extra money to actually invest to get to this place. Great, let's do one land flip a year, and that could help pay for that. Or I want to accelerate this and do more. Well, let's say you do 2 land flips a year. Okay, so let's re-engineer this and say, let me grab a different color and say, okay, well, what if I did 2 land flips a year? I'm not quitting my day job. I'm not going out there and trying to do something crazy. I don't have to go rehab a house, that type of stuff. Okay, so let's say we do 2 land flips a year. And let's just keep the average profit the same and say you're gonna make $24,000 with that. Okay, and let's say that that entire $24,000 is going to go into your lifestyle budget. Well, in 16 years, if you did that, you'd have $1.2 million. In 12 years, you would have 665 because it's coming from there. Okay, it's the same amount of money, so the calculations are the same. However, let's say you also had your 1,000. So you're like, hey, I'm taking 1,000 out of our earned income every single year. I'm going to do 2 land flips a year, which is going to give me about 24,000, which is 2,000 a month. So what I'm actually putting in is $3,000 every single month. So let's take a look at that. What if we increase that to $3,000, and we're going to go 16 years, just so we have an idea what that looks like. 16 years times 12 is 192 days. Calculate this up. Take a guess. What do you think it is? Take a guess. It's going to blow you away. It's 1.77 million. 1.77 million by doing 2 land flips a year, putting $1,000 of your own money into that, you're 1.77 million. Okay, well, interesting. on that 1.77 million, what would a 12% return look like? Well, I can put the 1.77 million, whoops, not 17 million, and I can times that by 12%, and that's $204,000 a year, which that is going to divide that by 12 is going to give me $17,000 a month. Now, maybe I wanted 17,000, so this whole plan works great for me, and maybe I don't need that much, so I make some adjustments. When it comes down to this, you basically have a few adjustments that you can make. Let's talk about this. Okay. Adjustment 1. I don't like that. The color's not working. Things that you control. Number 1 is how much money you put in now. Okay, the more you put in, the better that's going to be because of a principle called compound interest, which I'm going to show you here in just a minute how that compound interest is going to work. Number 2 thing you can adjust is how much money I'm going to put in monthly. Okay, you can do that by taking money from your earned income, which I recommend doing, and you can do that by doing some fix and flips. You can do by land. You can do, there's a lot of different ways, but this is going to be other investments. So I increase the amount that I'm putting in monthly. That's the other way that I can accelerate this. Number 3 is the number of years. The longer I'm willing to keep this plan in place because of compound interest, because I am not taking the money out of this, the more that is going to go up to. So the more time you have, the faster that's going to grow in dollar amounts. Okay, so that's the number of years thing. The idea with compound interest is you're making interest on the interest. So if you make interest for this year, rather than spending that money, you then are able to reinvest that, and that's going to get a rate of return. And so it compounds on top of each other. That's the concept there. The other thing that you have some control over here is the rate of return. Okay, what rate of return? If you're only going to get a 3% return, it's going to take you a lot longer to get to those numbers, which is why this 12% return, hard money lending, maybe it's a 10% return, getting into these double-digit returns is what I think is the ticket, is getting the double-digit returns. Get double-digit returns, put a reasonable time period together, put as much money as you can on a monthly basis, do some extra things within reason. I see a lot of people are like, I want to fix and flip 100 homes this year. It's like, well, why don't you just do one? Keep your day job, put some money in there, do one a year, and then decide if you like it, or maybe just do a land deal so you don't even have to deal with the construction. Take that money, put it into here, and accelerate your entire financial freedom plan by doing that. Okay, so those are the adjustments. Now, the next thing we're going to chat about here is some other accelerators, okay? So the other things that you could be doing is you could be flipping land like we talked about, but you could also do fix and flip. Okay, maybe with the fix and flip, you're going to make more money typically because it's going to be a bigger, maybe it's a $200,000 deal. So maybe you're going to make $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 on that. So that's going to be bigger. There is more risk. It's going to take more time. And so that's another thing. Maybe it's like, hey, I'm going to do one fix and flip a year or 2 fix and flips a year, or I'm going to do 1 fix and flip and 1 land deal. And I'm going to take all of that money and put it back into my plan so I can grow this financial freedom plan. The other thing that you can do is long-term rentals or BRRRR deals. If you're not familiar with what a BRRRR deal is, we're going to explain that right now. The concept is, let's say that you buy a property, let's see, no, they'll go 80%. So let's say that you're going to go for a property that's worth $100,000, okay, once it's fixed up. And let's say it's going to cost you $80,000 to buy it and to fix it up. So we'll just say it's $60,000 on the buy, and we're going to say the fix-up cost is $20,000 for a total of $80,000, okay? Then what happens is you borrow money from a hard money lender. You borrow the hard money, you're paying those higher interest rates, but the reason you're doing that is the hard money, if you do it right, can come up with most, if not all of that money, so you're coming in with very little money. Then you get the fix-ups, and then you do long-term financing at whatever interest rates are, 3, 6, 5, whatever they are at the time, and then you rent it out. The concept with all of this is you're getting into this rental property with little to no money down, because typically what happens is when you're buying a rental property, they're going to want 20% down to get that standard nice, and they're only going to do on properties that don't need work. If the property's in need of work, they're going to say, nope, you can't do that, which is why you end up making money on this, because you use a hard money lender that can do the property that's in poor condition and can get you some money for the fix-ups. And then the house is in nice condition. It's worth more. The appraisal comes in for more, and you do what's called a rate and a term refinance. So you go to a 30-year loan at a low interest rate, and you have that for 30 years. And if interest rates go down even further than what you have, let's say you get a 6% interest and rates go down to 4%, awesome. Refinance, go down to 4%, and you are cash flowing even more. So that's the next thing I wanted to talk about, is some of these benefits that you're going to have with these rental properties, whether it's vacation rentals or nightly rentals, VRBOs, whether it's a BRRRR type strategy that goes into a long-term rental. There's a few things that happen here, okay? So number one, you typically get cash flow. You may not, but the cash flow is the difference between all your expenses and what you receive. So maybe you get some cash flow. Maybe it's $100 a month. Maybe it's $200 a month, $500, whatever the case is, okay? So that's one of the things that you're getting, is you're getting some cash flow in most cases. Number two, you're getting debt pay down by the tenant. Most people overlook this. What they don't realize is when they are making that payment that the tenant is paying for, a portion of that payment is going to pay down the principal balance. So you keep owing less. So maybe $100 goes every single time. What also happens is it's called an amortization schedule. So at the beginning, it's $100 going towards principal, let's say, and $900 going towards interest. Well, when you get down to year 30, it's $900 going towards principal and $100 going towards interest. So the longer you have that loan, the better. So you have to be careful when you're doing a refinance to make sure it's really worth it. And so that's a calculation that you can do, right? So the tenant is paying that down, not you, they're paying for that. Number three, you're typically getting tax write-offs. So you could get some interest expense as you're putting money into the property. Those are some things that you can do. The other thing is property values just simply go up over time. It's called appreciation. If you look at this over the last 50 years, 90 years, whatever the case is, yes, there's some ups and downs, but overall, it is going to be going up at a pretty steady rate. You could look at the last 50 years or 30 years and see what that's gone up and say, hey, it approximately doubles every 10 to 15 years. So my property value that I might have bought for $80,000, okay, which is now worth $100,000 because I did the repairs, 10 years later, 15 years later, is worth $200,000. And I didn't have to do anything, right? I had to take care of the property, make sure I had good tenants, do those types of things. But that went up, called appreciation, went up over time, and I didn't do much to make that happen. Number five, you can look at this as well. Rents go up over time. You can look at the charts and say, hey, what's happening to rents over time? How much have they been going up? Because that same thing that's been happening the last 20 years will probably happen over the next 20 years. And so rents are going to go up, which is then going to increase your cash flow pretty drastically. Number six is you can have approved legitimate business expenses. So the idea with this is when you fill your car up with gas, because you're going to go over to the property to do this or to do that, you can pay with that with money that is before you've paid taxes, right? So basically, hey, those things I am paying before I pay taxes because it's a direct business expense that's actually going to go to this property. So I can tell you with this type of strategy, it takes several years, I would say probably somewhere around the 10-year mark, where it starts really making sense. In the first 5 years, it's a lot of work, guys. But you can cut down that learning curve drastically if you follow a proven system. Okay, I wanna make sure we're talking about all these accelerators, and I wanna recap what we're talking about. So accelerators, you can do land flips, you can do fix and flips, you can do BRRRR, you can do long-term rentals, which a BRRRR turns into a long-term rental, nightly rentals, your VRBOs and those things. And it's the same concept with your nightly rentals. Basically, you borrow the money from a hard money lender on a property that needs work. So a traditional bank isn't gonna lend on it. Because you're buying that, you're getting a really good deal. Because you're getting that really good deal and the lender's gonna give you money for rehab, then you can fix it up so it can be a great long-term rental or a great nightly rental. and then you go and refinance. You've got built-in equity, and then you can run it as a nightly rental. So that's another thing you can do. And then we talked about this earlier, this whole concept of hard money lending. We put it at, say 12%. You could just keep doing the hard money lending, but all of these things are in the real estate sector, and these are accelerators to make your plan that you have either to fund your plan or to accelerate your plan even faster than what you originally thought was possible. Okay, let's do a quick recap here, guys. The most important 3 items you need for your financial freedom plan. Number 1, most important, is knowing your number. What is that number? What are you willing to sacrifice? What are you not willing to sacrifice? What is a good standard of living? What do you want your life to look like? What is that going to look like? Are you going to dip into principal? Those are all decisions that you can make, and is going to take some time. And you can do that by putting an apocalyptic budget, your current budget, and a dream budget. We also take into consideration the tax bracket changes that may happen, Social Security, kids' expenses. You might be in a time where you're spending a lot of money on kids, which is going to go away over time. You won't have that same amount if you're paying for weddings and college or whatever the case is, okay? Number 2 is you have to make a plan. So part of that money that we've gone through, we're saying we're gonna set this part of this money aside so that we can fulfill this dream plan that we have. So that starts out with how much money I have, and then it talks about how much money I can put in monthly, and then we determine how many years that is and the rate of return that we're wanting to get, which double-digit returns is going to be coming more in the hard money form. Make sure you're not gambling, speculating, or doing those types of things with a lottery mentality. Then we're going to say either one of 2 things. I don't have a lot of money I can put in monthly. I only have $100 or $50 or $5 or $300, whatever that number is. So you're going to say, well, I've got to do one of 2 things. I've got to increase the interest rate, which then we get into speculation and that type of stuff, which I don't recommend you do. I increase the number of years that I'm going to work this plan. Very viable option. So instead of 16 years, we're going to take it 20 years. Okay, great. I can increase the amount of money I put in monthly, but where are you going to get that money from? Or I can increase the amount of money that I actually have or I'm putting in. So the way that we can do that is by some of these accelerators. So for example, land flips is an accelerator. I can take that money, I can put it into the plan, I can increase that monthly contribution. But I could do that, I could do it a couple of times, or I could maybe do a land deal and do a fix and flip deal and take that entire balance of payment, what I make on that profit, that entire $30,000, apply it to it. That is going to cut down the number of years that are necessary to make your plan come about. We already talked about the BRRRRs and how those things happen, some of the long-term rentals and some of the benefits there, because you could actually sell that property, put $100,000 in, cut years off your plan, or the cash flow's gone up so substantially, you're making another $1,000, which means your plan needs to produce $1,000 less a month, which means you can cut down on the number of years or cut down the money that you're putting in. Those are all things that you can be doing. This is the 3 most important financial freedom things you need to be thinking about and numbers that you need to know.